Okay, Dave, we've talked about the big picture of God's role and man's role in the recreation event. And I'd like to address an issue that's bound to come up, and that's the issue of what happens after you've been fully converted, you've
Okay.
come to walk with the Lord, you know that He's touched your life, He's drawn you into trusting Him, trusting His Word, following His Word. He's given you sight. You can see, not just in this life, but you can see
Mm.
spiritual things and see the value of the things of God versus the things of man. So what happens later in life when you've added a lot of responsibilities to your life? You're
Mm.
uh, through the initial period of excitement and knowing that God's working in your life, and now you've got this life that's fully grounded in the Lord, but He's added responsibilities, and you got schedules, and you got things you can barely keep up with devotion. You can barely
Yeah.
keep all the things in the air
Right.
going, and what happens
Mm.
when that happens, and now you are faced with the need to change. Something needs to change in your life. You need to keep growing, and you know how you go forward after a long period of time of having been converted.
Mm.
Is the role of change still important? Is the struggle still worth doing, or is it just impossible?
Mm.
Do we just have? Are we just left with whatever we come out of our honeymoon period with the Lord?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think change is the right word. I think there's been times in my Christian life in which I thought of change as adding new things, but change implies sort of taking something and altering something, right?
Mm.
And I think you had pointed out, and when you were talking about the passage on Sunday, how how particular it is to each person, the kind of
Mm.
transformation that the Lord wants to do. And I think, and you had said, like, it just struck me, it made me think of a couple of things. But you had said, you kind of have to know who you were. You kind of have to know who you were before the Lord really got a hold of you and started to recreate you. And I think that's really important. I think there's a temptation to just say, all all things are passed away. Behold, all things are new, and so you just want to, like, lobotomize your past. And I think the places where I've seen the most change is when I've been able to see that something about the person I was is the place that the Lord wants to bring the change, right? That He's trying to change something that. So let's say, for example, growing up and into my 20s, very ambitious person,
Mm.
very ambitious. Ambitious for what I thought, good things. Ambitious for a certain career, certain education, certain many things, right? But very ambitious, and for years and years and years. And so, as a Christian, when the Lord, um, intervened, began to really save me, I had to reckon with the fact that I was this really ambitious person. And at first, it was like, okay, well, now I just need to direct the ambition to good things, make sure they're really good things, make sure they're church things, or make sure they got Christian labels on them or something like this. But what I realized was that it wasn't change. It was just finding other ways to feed that ambition. But the motive there was still, like, to be, really, really good at something, or to excel at this for personal reasons. It wasn't like the Lord, asked me to excel at something for His reasons. It was still the same DNA. It was still the same sequence. And so I think the major moments, let's say in the last handful of years, when I have seen clear change in my life, has come from when the old self, my old person, was the place where the Lord was trying to move something in a different place. And so I can think of before, when my wife Lisa was pregnant with our first son.
Mm.
And I can just remember I still had all my ambition. Now it was like, okay, now it's even more noble, because it'll be like, for my family, I'll be excelling at whatever for even more people. It's like it was a really tempting moment to say like this is going to keep feeding this ambition because now it's going to help my family or something, and the Lord very deliberately, right in the same sort of year that my son was born, kind of called me on it and just said, you're still fostering selfish ambition, and the change that he wanted to do was to break that. And I kept wanting to just sort of put different clothes on it and say, oh, now it's really pure, whatever. But it was still selfish. I was still really, it was a deeply selfish motive, but it was getting clouded over by good goals. And so he showed me that it had nothing to do with the goals. It had to do with that root, and that root was in my old self. That was the old DNA. That was the old sequencing. That was the old person. And so he called me to give up some major markers of success, of having fulfilled certain ambitions, or at least be willing to. And I had this conversations with my wife, and we prayed and talked through things to do with career, and talked things to do with moving for this and going here for that. Things that I had been fostering for years and years and years and years and years, and just knew that they weren't bad or evil, and so they must be okay. And the Lord wanted to fundamentally break that form of ambition in my heart, and He did it by making me a dad, by making me have different conversations with my wife about being parents and what the Lord really wanted of our lives, and it had nothing to do with me achieving whatever.
And was it painful to go through this?
It was one of those things where I think when I didn't understand it, it was. I think it was like scary. It was like, oh no. Like I'd been in places in the years before where the Lord had asked me to give up something I wanted. And I was like, oh, I don't like that feeling. Like that stinks. So when I like kind of thought about it, but didn't really talk with my wife about it, or didn't really start praying about it much, but when I just kind of felt it vaguely, it was like, oh no, what if he doesn't allow this to happen? But when I saw clearly that it was a change He wanted to do, I've said this to other people probably a bunch of times, but it felt like that. It felt like once I got it, once I saw He wants to change you, like there's a fundamental thing He wants to do in your heart that is not just this external thing. That's really what I want as a Christian. I have been saved, right? I am in that years long process. So once I saw that was what He wanted to do, and I understood it and could see it clearly, like the guy in the passage can see, at least in a way at first, he can see Jesus, can say who He is, and begin to follow Him. Once I realized that, it felt almost like freedom. It just felt like, you create things and then you just labor under a vision of yourself that you made up. And it was like the Lord just took that vision away, didn't replace it with anything. It was just like, you don't have that anymore.
So looking back on it,
yeah.
What did you actually gain and what did you actually lose?
I think I probably gained my family. I think I would have always been able to convince myself, and maybe Lisa for a while, that sacrificing time with the family or a certain kind of involvement with my kids for the sake of this career or this ambition was clearly good and was clearly for them. Really, they just needed to see that, even though I wasn't around. Like I could see having really pushed it and kept claiming that it was good, and actually lost much of that connection with my family. And I feel like I've been given my family. I've been given a life with young kids who I'm like able to be attentive to, because I don't have an eye over the hill of like, I wish I wasn't just a dad. I wish I was more. Like I don't have that distraction that feels like I would be willing to put them to the side to fulfill it. And I think He probably rescued me from being willing to sacrifice better things for an old ambition.
Yeah, and since you're quite an accomplished person for your young age.
don't
I
know.
mean, it's not like not like your ambition was going to automatically crash and burn in the ground. You probably would have gotten somewhere.
Maybe. I'm a pretty motivated person. Yeah, I mean, I try not to be lazy, you know, but
Yeah.
it was what is it for? And when it was for the Lord, it was like still, you know, work hard, do the next thing, but it wasn't for me in the same way. And it really did, not to sound whatever, it really felt like I had been freed.
And
You know.
so you feel like you can maintain that balance between proper ambition and all the rest of the goals.
I'm in the
you've
midst of it
got.
right now. Yeah, I'm kind of constantly praying for, there's a lot of good opportunities, there's a lot of good things, but I'm always having to pray, like, is this where you specifically want me to invest my time, especially if it's going to take it away from Lisa or the kids. That's a big deal, and it needs to make sure it's not just like, you know, satisfying something that's just in me, you know. And so it's regularly up for review, but I feel like because the Lord magnified the moment and I've verbalized it, it's always in front of me to make sure I don't pretend something else.
Ever catch yourself getting ambitious about something?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, like, well, okay, it's so hard. So as a Christian, it's just gonna be very subtle, right? And so it can be like, well, you know, but then more people would hear this about this, or you know, if I started this, then maybe that would be able to bless, right? It's like,
Sure.
it's just good sounding things that might even be maybe Jesus sounding things, and they may even be things the Lord has, but my inability to see that, I need to see Jesus. I can't see very far down the road. I need to see the Lord right now and say, where is the best use of my time, Lord? And trust that He can see what I can only imagine and guess at, and probably am wrong.
And does it get easier to give up the ambition, or?
I think it does once you see it. I think if you're a Christian, you really do want what the Lord has for you. And if that's true, and you're like you really want what the Lord has for you, and you really trust the Lord, then you don't want to waste your life thinking you were doing the right thing. Like, that'd be crazy. So yeah, I think it does get easier in the sense that it's easier to call yourself out and say, I don't want anything except what Jesus has. And so what do I need to do to make sure I'm hearing Jesus and what He has for me? Because I don't want to waste any time as a Christian chasing something else. So I think once you kind of talk that out, or maybe share that with someone, and you know yourself and you know where to watch out for, but you also know those are the places He's going to keep trying to change you from, I think it helps you really focus on a handful of places in your heart or in your life. And I think it does get easier in that sense.
Well, Dave, I want to really thank you for being so vulnerable and taking us down that personal
course.
narrative, because it really shows how God can deeply change something in us well after the honeymoon period of knowing Him, and needed, necessary. He can dive into these deep projects in us and get us a little bit more like we need to be for the life He's given us. So thank you very much.